Chapter 19. Burned. Wind smashed against the mountain. The scarlet treasure chest, still half buried in snow, only banged its lid open and shut. But the battered old sea trunk Ravello had pulled over such a distance on its springy wheels that the wind shook and rocked and set rolling like a runaway perambulator. It rolled over the brink, arcing out into space and falling, spilling out salt, cellars, crockery, maps, tools and string. They never heard it land. The blizzard was on them now, loading them with ice, filling their ears and eyes and hands with snow. "Now you all die too, Hook!" cried Peter Pan. The circus pirate shrugged. "I may. It is of no consequence. I have done what I set out to do. I have my treasure. What else remains?" "And has it made you happy, your treasure?" asked Wendy crisply, because mothers always point out how badness doesn't bring joy, crime doesn't pay, thieves don't prosper. Pain and confusion disturbed Ravello's scarred face. "How would I know?" he asked, taking out the marathon cup and gently caressing the inscription of his name now magically down on the base. "Happiness is not a food I have tasted before. I do have a curious feeling inside me, akin to chocolate cake and fireworks and the music of Mr. Elgar." That sounded suspiciously like happiness to Wendy, but she did not say so for fear it encouraged Hook in its wickedness. John was busy rubbing two sticks together to try and make a spark, but even the sticks were shivering with cold. Curly was trying to build an igloo out of snow where they could shelter until the blizzard passed. But igloos are not made of loose snow. Tootles said they should sing to keep up their spirits, because that is what heroes do when things look blackest. And Ravello gave the strangest laugh and began the singing himself. "Jolly boating weather and a high harvest breeze, blade on the feather, shade off the trees." It was an Eton song. Peter, though he did not want to be an Eton boy, did not want to know the words, could not resist singing. So he sang as if he was firing cannon at the pirate, and every word might hole him. "Rugby may be more clever, Harrow may make more narrow, but we'll row forever, steady from stroke to bow." The blizzard pulled hair out their heads. It ripped the seams of their blanket coats. It kicked the snow in their faces and sent avalanches crashing down the mountain. The spit froze in their mouths. The words of the song rattled in their mouths like ice cubes. If they had not all linked arms and clung to each other, the wind would have thrown them off Neverpeak and tossed them into the sky. "And nothing in life shall save the chain that is round us now. And nothing in life shall sever the chain that is round us now." If you suppose that Tinkerbell came to the rescue, I must tell you now, you are wrong. Wishing had brought Tinkerbell back from a place far beyond strange, and her wings were still sticky with improbability. Tinkerbell had nestled down to sleep again in the scarlet treasure chest. "Too cold," she said drowsily. "Too noisy. And youth will be still in our faces when we cheer for an Eton crew. And youth will be still in our faces when..." The words trailed away into the great silence that was waiting for them. Winter had gripped Neverpeak in its teeth and was shaking them to death. Suddenly, like a wasp aiming for a picnic, something whirled past the explorers that was not a snowflake. Glowing like a cinder, it had settled on the hasp of the treasure chest. "Fireflyer!" In Neverland, a treasure chest contains the treasure seeker's dearest wish, and unknown to anyone, it was Fireflyer who had wished for Tinkerbell. Ever since that first intriguing mention, "Do you know Tinkerbell?" the idea of her had been growing in Firefly's head, glowing in the dark little sea case of his fairy skull. Everything he had heard about her made him want to know more. He had played slightly with questions and come to the conclusion that Tinkerbell, willing to drink poison and able to tell lies as big as albatrosses, was far too marvellous to be dead. Now seeing Tinkerbell, his sugar coating of fairy dust glowed with the heat of love at first sight, it melted the varnish on the chest. Tinkerbell opened her eyes, but seemed to think she was dreaming Firefly, because she gave only an apologetic little smile and said, "So cold, too cold. Got to go now." And then the snow rampaged between them like an army of jealous fairies. "Fairies die if other fairies ignore them," Firefly complained, but she took no notice. After a moment or two, Firefly answered, Firefly announced grandly, "I'm not going to light any old bonfire. I won't do it. I refuse. I won't." But he had to remember, the thing he did best was lying. Then he plunged like a drop of molten gold into the woodpile. "Oh, Firefly, no!" cried Wendy. "You will burn yourself all up," cried Tootles. "Oh, my dear idiot," cried Slightly. Under its blanket of snow, the bonfire sagged and settled. It seemed impossible that anything could make it burn now. But Firefly did. Gradually the twigs turned from white to brown, then from brown to orange, and with a crackling cackle, flames came to life, fanned by the howling wind into a blazing beacon fire. Firefly's body heat had lit the bonfire, and Neverpeak was topped by a triumphal flame visible from all over the island. Some of the flames burned with the same colour as Firefly. Some of the ash that flew upwards looked like small child wings. The company turned their faces away, covered their eyes sooner than see what befell the brave little fairy, all except Peter. He went so close that he was hollowed round with flames, and his eyebrows singed. And he bent and peered and called and reached his swordfish sword in case he could rescue Firefly from a fiery end. The sword crumbled in shards in the heat. "Be careful, Peter," cried Wendy, and cinders spilled out over his feet. "I swore I would stick by you all the way," he answered. "But oh, what a fairy! What a whopping liar!" John agreed in awe. "Like Tink in the old days," said Curly. Then Tinker Bell well and truly woke up. Something exciting was going on. Lives hung in the balance. People were remembering him fondly. Also, another fairy was getting all the attention. That was quite enough to do the trick. "Wait, young man!" Tinker Bell darted towards the fire, meaning to follow Firefly, but her movements were still sleep-spurred, and Peter's hand whipped out and caught her and kept tight hold. "Enough lost for one day," he said gruffly. "It is odd, because there were never many twigs and herbs and grass to begin with. What with Hulk's treasure, dog bones, silk, sago and gold, the twins had very few to work with. Their bonfire was only small, and yet that fire burned bigger and brighter than any beacon on the night of the Armada. Magic fuel must be more combustible. They were able to cook the bread dough and spaghetti, melt snow, and make a gallon of tea. They sent smoke signals summoning help, though the blizzard did its best to smudge them out. Finally, the smoke scarfed up the snowflakes and carried them off. The mountain felt warm at its peak and remembered its childhood. It had been a volcano once, remember. Perhaps the mountain, unlike Peter or Hook, had only happy memories of youth, but because remembering made him smile. "Oh, I know it is usual. It may never have happened before or since, but the mountain smile, no other word for it. All its downs turned up. It flexed the muscles of its four faces, north, south, east and west, and the glaciers cracked and the ice bridges fell, and the snow could not keep its grip. Trees emerged, astonished, and shook the snow out of their hair. Grass grew through, stubbly at first, then shaggy like a full beard. Waterfalls unfroze with a splash and rush and salt flowers into opening. On the top of Neverpeak, hunter and prey, villain and hero, child, adult, and fairy stood in a circle, overlapping at knee, all wing, high in each other like animals at a waterhole. They watched the blizzard blow away into the distance out to sea, soon no bigger than Wendy's apron blown off the washing line. The fire went out at last. "I must go and look for the silly chap, I suppose," said Tinker Bell in a world-weary sigh, though her wings were throbbing in a dozen excitable colours. And wriggling free of Peter's hand, she darted straight into the smoking bonfire and instantly disappeared with a fizz and a crackle. Two small fairies do not make much of a glow, but the air seemed dark without them. "We must fight, you and I," said Peter to the raveling man. "What with?" sneered Rebello, turning away. "Name your non-existent weapon. Besides, we are both opinion-eaten boys. Bad form scrap, particularly in front of the ladies." And touching his frizzled hairline in salute to Wendy and Tootles, he moved away with a happy skip of his crocodile boots. Peter pounced after him. "Let's finish it here and now, you coward!" and felt a steel hook brush his cheek as Ravello turned and held him at bay. "Do you really think the choice is yours, Moth?" hissed Ravello. "Did you never play a game called Consequences?" Snatching his tattooed treasure map from Peter, he pretended to write with his hook in place of a quill pen. Once upon a time there was a boy called Pan in a place called Neverland who met a pirate named James Hook, and they fought to the death, and the consequence was that James Hook got fed to a crocodile. Peter broke in triumphantly. Ah, yes, countered Hook, but every consequence has further consequences, my boy. Everything you do comes back to haunt you. Each enemy you feed to a crocodile, every boy you turn away. Do you seriously think you will see the Neverwood again, that I have plucked the wings off you? You put me in my coffin once, in my crocodile coffin. Do you seriously think you could kill a man who has risen from the dead? Read your history books. Ah, but I was forgetting you cannot read, can you? Inagoramus minimus. I must tell you then, it is no great feat for explorers to reach their goal. It is the homeward journey that finishes them. The broken clock is ticking. My father faces consequences of your past deeds. I have no need to kill you, cockadoodle. That task I will leave to Neverland. Chapter 20. Ill Luck. The bonfire was a black heap of charcoal. The twins pulled out 2 sticks and drew a picture of Ravello on the rock and threw stones at it. Wendy, who had been watching Peter's face since the pirate left, pulled out another piece and wrote in big letters across the highest jutting pinnacle of rock, Pan's Peak. Well, she said, standing back proudly, wiping clean her hands on her pirate flag dress. What? Said Peter blankly, not able to read it. So Wendy drew a cockerel with its beak open, shrieking, "Cock-a-doodle-doo!" And Peter understood and smiled. It was a small smile, a worn-out smile. His fingers were still hooked through the white-eaten tide that circled his neck like a hangman's noose. John wanted to draw a picture of his own on the rock, pulled another blackened twig out of the bonfire, and found a fairy sitting on its tip, sooty from head to foot, an inkblot of a fairy. "Fireflyer, you're alive!" "Naturally," said the inkblot. They crowded eagerly around, and Tootles made a little bath out of a cup of cool tea. But as the fairy sank from sight, turning the tea black with soot, another voice behind him said, "Don't believe a word he says. He is such a liar, that boy." And a similarly filthy Tinkerbell clambered out of the bonfire and roughly hauled Firefly out of the teacup. "Ladies first," she said, and got in. They all had to close their eyes while she watched the show off. "So fairies are fireproof," said John, who had a scientist's curiosity about these things. "Only on Wednesdays," said Firefly categorically. "I think it's Fridays," said Curly. "Oh dear, then I must be dead," said Firefly. After all, that Tinkerbell and Firefly would only speak to each other because they were so much in love. They did not seem to hear anything that was said to them, took no interest in the gathering up of litter and treasure, the raising of that rainbow banner, the scanning of the island through Hook's brass telescope. "Come then, if you come in," called Peter, but the fairies ignored them. "People die if fairies ignored them," said slightly teasingly, but the 2 fairy lovers only leapt into the treasure chest and pulled shut the lid with a deafening slam. When Curly opened it again, there was nothing and no one inside, not even any cold sago pudding. Going down should have been easy. The cold was not so fierce, the mountain was not so slippery, lower down the air was not so thin. Here and there they found wreckage from a sea chest, a pram wheel, a pair of sugar tongs, an empty matchbox, and yet with each slope and cliff face and danger they overcame, Peter grew paler and slower and wearier. He wrenched at the eaten cravats until his neck was livid red. He trembled, stumbled and fell, and each time took longer to get back on his feet. "Let's pitch camp here, Captain," said slightly when they reached a grassy ledge, but found he was still banished and in nowhere land because Peter would not speak to him. The other sat down then and there, exhausted, but Peter pressed on, head down, shoulders rounded, hands pressed to his rib cage. "I don't go about with grown-ups," he muttered. "Grown-ups can't be trusted." But the voice was more defeated than defiant. Then he leaned against the cliff and coughed until his legs petered over him. Coughed until he was kneeling on the ground, coughed until his forehead was on the grass, coughed until he slumped over sideways and disappeared entirely over the brink of the ledge. Further down the mountain, Captain James Hook, or Ravello if you prefer, sat with his long legs encircling a bird's nest, holding one egg at a time with his hook and sucking out the contents. For the first time in his life, he was finding it hard not to whistle for sheer joy, though everyone knows whistling is damnably unlucky. He picked a blade of glass and hitting it between two fingers of his good hand, blew a single quacking note. Eddies of movement stirred the bracken on the plain below him. Ravello smiled to see it. Then, unannounced, a boy came slithering down the escarpment behind him and all, but dislodged him from his perch. Thinking he was under attack, Hook jumped to his feet, a bird's egg still impaled on his hook. But the boy only jackknifed round his ankle and lay like a dead thing, eyelids half open. Before Hook had a chance to recognise Peter and raise the hook to impale him like an eggshell, lots more children came sliding down the cliff, showering him with earth and pebbles, and all yelling like dervishes. "Leave him be! Let him go! Don't touch him! He must not be touched!" "I'll nurse you, Peter!" cried Tootles, and ran to Peter's side. "I'll take care of you!" John rushed at Hook, sword drawn. "This is your doing, you blackguard!" The pirate began, too startled for retaliation or glee. The explorers sank to their knees round their leader. "Maybe he has pneumonia," Tootles said, "from wearing only a shirt in the blizzard." Tootles tried to cover Peter over with a scarlet frock, but when he gave a cry of horror and ran and pulled it off again, threw it at Hook. "You've killed him, haven't you?" she yelled. "I," said Hook. Tootles felt his forehead, looked for a pulse, stroked his hair, and laid her head on his chest to listen for heartbeats. Then she sat back with a sob and declared, "Peter is dead!" A quiver went through Neverland, then that made the horizon buckle, and the reflections climb out of every pool and lake and lagoon. The league of hand covered him with the rainbow banner. In the dreadful silence that followed, the accusation stirred again. "He died of getting so cold," said second twin. "Sooner than be like you," said John, and jabbed the tip of the swordfish blade in Hook's face. "No, it was that tie round his throat. It choked the life out of him," said Wendy. "Your tie," snarled John, and jabbed the blade tip at Hook's woolly throat. "Or else you made him think what he would be when he grew up, and it broke his heart," said Slightly. "All down to you," said John, jabbing Hook in the chest. "Or maybe he hated being Hook so much that he upped and died on purpose," suggested first twin. "Happy now," said John, and jabbed Hook in the belt buckle. "Or maybe Hook poisoned him with the salt," said Curly, "or the comb, or the boot polish, or the tea, or the berries, or... like he poisoned all Neverland," growled John. Hook smartly sidestepped to avoid John's next sword thrust. "He is not dead, you fools," he said between gritted teeth, and pointed at the small body on the ground. The ripple was no bigger than the surface of a river when a pike swims by, but the rainbow banner did ripple from some movement beneath it. "No thanks to you," said John, and jabbed again. Hook gave an exposed gasp, snapped on the blade with one crocodile skin boot, and snapped it in 12 places. "I did not poison him, or strangle him, or cozen him out of his life," said Hook, ribbing with iteration. "Did I not preserve him through danger and hardship? Did I not pluck him from certain death at the ice bridge? Not out of your fondest affection, I confess, but I did so. Do you not understand? I needed the brat for my grand plan. Make him ill. I was relying on him to recover my treasure. He was more hooked than I am. Do you think I would poison my own likeness? Were you not there when I abandoned you to the mercies of the island, when I left it for land and whether to kill you all? If ever I raise a hand to finish Peter Pan, it will be in his hand." And he brandished his hook, first in John's face and then over the boy Pan. When he aimed a downward slash at Peter's throat, the children screamed, thinking they were witnessing cold-blooded murder, and slightly called Hook a coward and a monster. But the hook caught only the fabric and the white tie round Peter's neck and held the boy within reach of Hook's good hand. In the time it takes to clip 2 fingers, the white knot was untied, and Peter fell back, cracking his head on the ground, but otherwise unmurdered. "Now are you satisfied, madam?" said Hook to Wendy, and slumped down again, his back to the group. Tootles knelt and whispered in Peter's ear. "Are we playing them doctors and nurses, Peter?" "Oh, please say we are. I'm your nurse and you're the patient, and you have to get better and be ever so thankful." But the boy on the ground did not stir. When she trickled pretend medicine in at his lips, it trickled out again at the corner of his mouth. His skin was clammy and the breath rasped in his throat. Tootles whispered, "You're not playing this game right, Peter. Really, you're not." First twin bundled up the discarded red coat and held it to him. as it was Peter himself. Thus the band of explorers formed a circle once more on the slopes of the Nether Peak, not blasted this time by wind and snow, but by the terrible possibility that the boy on the ground was dying, might still die, and they had no idea why or how to prevent it. There were 2 moons that night. Alongside the midnight moon, dark-eyed with worry, hung her quavering reflection, risen from the sea in need of comforting company. Their 2 anxious white faces gazed down at the slopes of Nether Peak, offering bandages of moonbeam. Chapter 21. Coming of Age. Remembering Peter's words, they sent Hook to Nowhere Land, refusing to speak a word to him, pretending he no longer resisted. But there he remained, bunched on himself, eyes glimmering in the dark, wide awake as usual. Was it to witness the death of his sworn enemy? Or because it was too dark to descend the mountain, or simply because he liked to be country? "Go away," John said. "You have been banished. It's in the rules. You have to go." "Whose rules?" said Hook. "Go yourselves. I was here first." "Walt, what? Are you waiting for Peter to die?" said Wendy. "Might be." "Only a bad sport breaks the rules," John brooded sulkily, and vowed not to speak another word to the man until a question entered his head and won't answering. "Anyway, I don't believe what you said. I thought you were a pirate before you came here, not a schoolboy. Bolson the Blackbeard, bloodthirstiest pirate ever to sail the 7 seas. That's what I heard." "Huh! Lies! A slur put about my enemies. I have never served under any man. Why would Hook style a styleless ship's rat who could not count house 5? I doubt Blackbeard could spell Eton, let alone wear the old school tie. I would not have suffered him aboard the ship of mine to chip paint. And where are your scurvy pirate cronies now?" asked John, trying to sound horsey and disdainful, though secretly he just wanted to know. John would have liked to be a pirate, but for the robbing and killing part of it. "I sent them off to do their bit in the war," said Hook, "as every man should. They sent me postcards first off, from Belgium and France. Then they forgot, I suppose. The postcards stopped. I imagine they were too good having a time. I imagine they were too busy living it up on booty and the spoils of war, spending their loot on cake and beautiful French women, unwilling to return to the drudgery of life aboard the Jolly Roger." Wendy nodded. "I like to imagine that as well," she said. "Every time I think about my brother Michael." Their eyes met for a briefest of moments, during which they understood each other perfectly. "I see you didn't go to the war, though," said John sarcastically. The pirate glared at him murderously and said in a roaring whisper as low as cold as a subterranean river, "Thanks to that one there, I was unfit for duty." "Hush," said Nurse Tootles in a flutter of fright. "We should let Peter sleep. Sleep is good for people. Sleep does wonders." Hook, who had not slept for 20 years, gave a low and bitter laugh and turned his back on him, hunching his wall round him. Suddenly Curly was up on his feet. "What Peter needs is a doctor," he declared desperately. "A real doctor." Everyone looked around from their mountain perch in the wilderness waste and wild vastness of Neverland, and wondered how a doctor would be to be conjured from such saggy chaos. Doctors are spawned in pounds of antiseptic and on plains of clean linen or starched sheets. Neverland is not their natural habitat, and yet Curly already knew where one was to be found. It showed in the set of his drawer. Taking one deep breath, he crossed to where the pirate sat slumped under his fleece. "Ask me," he said, sinking the fingers of both hands in Rebello's sleeve. "Ask me now." Slightly sprang up. "No, Curly, don't! Ask me, Rebello." There was a moving confusion of worries and questions from the others who did not understand. Hook scowled at Curly and tried to ease himself free, but Curly hung on, fierce as a terrier. "Ask me, Hook! Ask me what I want to be when I grow up." "But Curly," protested slightly, trying to pull him away, "think about what you're doing. Do you want to be like me, grown up like me, never able to go home? There's nothing left for me to be Aurora. Do you want to be Aurora, Curly?" Curly swallowed hard and began to tug on the triangle of greasy wool that was both sleeve and arm of the pirate. Ravello's face contorted with pain, and he said, "Listen to your friend, Master Curly. If the cockadoodle lies, do you really think he will thank you? He will turn you out. He turned out all the rest." He won't suffer grown-ups in his company. The man's eyes were liquid with midnight, and where there should have been stars reflected in them, there was flying sparkles and shards of eggshell. The brat is dining, Mr. Curly. Nothing can save Pan now. Ah, but who has swayed you from your chosen fate? So tell me, Master Curly, what do you want to be when you... A doctor! Curly interrupted, sinking in his fingers almost to the bone of Hook's arms. So steeped was the fabric in poison that it cancelled out the youthful magic of Neverland and let time soak in through the pores of Curly's tender skin. As his fists filled up with unravelling wool, he felt the squibs and sparklers fill out in his head, to replace with the dull gleam of good sense and cleverness. His nose could smell chloroform and liniment. White petticoats paraded through his imagination like starched ghosts. His pockets rattled with hypodermics, thermometers and spatulas. Curly wished so hard to be a doctor that he grew taller than an heir, swallowing his blanket coat and even his wealth of curly hair. The growing pains were fearsome, but he kept tight hold of Ravello. And the bigger he grew, the more he remembered of being a doctor after all. He had been one before, back in Forrington, before the quest to Neverpeak. He remembered his stories now at medicine school, his days in Forrington County Hospital, and all this while his hands were filled with the wool that was both Ravello's arm and Ravello's clothing. He laid bare the steel hook and the scars inflicted by the crocodile. Ravello rose to his feet with a blood-curdling yell, but found himself no taller than Dr. Curly Darling, M.D., M.R.C.S. "I'm sorry if I hurt you, sir," said Curly. Now that he was a doctor, he regretted causing pain to everyone, and emptied his hand out of the crinkled wool, which spilled to the ground around the pirate's crocodile skin boots. Indistinctly, the children moved away from Curly. Doctors are almost as scary as pirates, what with their cold hands and dangerous handwriting, and they only ever visit when you are feeling too ill to make friends. Pulling a stethoscope from his pocket, Dr. Curly knelt down beside Peter and listened to the fluttering beat of his heart. It was the sound of fairyland at war with itself. It was the sound of eternal youth dying. But he clearly heard something else as well. Breaking the tip off his own soft blade, how small it was seemed now in his big cold hands. Curly cut a hole just over Pete's heart, and using the sugar tongs, drew out a length of something grey and wispy and flagged with soot. "I think that this may be the source of the trouble," he said. Back in the house in Kennington Square, in seizing the last sneeze of a cold, Wendy had reached out for a handkerchief and tucked it into her sleeve. A grown woman's handkerchief tucked into the sleeve of a girl's sundress. Inside that handkerchief, unknown to her, a strand of London fog. In the Neverwood, when Peter had mopped the blood from his face using a handkerchief, he had breathed in that same strand, and it had wound itself about his heart, tightening its grip day by day. Not the burning of the Neverwood, nor shipwreck, nor the touch of witches, nor the crushing weight of hostile fairies had got the better of Peter Pan. Nor hunger, nor cold, not Ravello's salts, nor his words of temptation were killing Peter. Nor even Hook's little bottle of poison, which he had blighted all Neverland, had brought Peter Pan to the edge of death. Only a strand of London fog. Dr. Curly made hard work of getting to his feet, as only grown-ups can. "Come, Slightly, time for us to go," he said, and cutting his own doors in the air with a surgeon's lancet, he stepped through it and into banishment. "Where are you going?" said Hog, still clutching an arm unravelled to the bone. "I broke the rule and grew," said Curly peacefully. "And unlike some people, I know how to play by the rules. I prescribed sleep for that arm, Ravello. As Nurse Toots will say, sleep is a great healer. Sleep and time." And with that he left, drawing slightly away, skidding noisily and clumsily down the mountainside by the light of 2 moons. With a deep sigh and then with a deeper intake of breath, Peter Pan sat up. Putting one small hand to his chest, he felt the life pouncing through his bloodstream, put back his head and crowed, Peter Pan, restored to health, was a wonderful sight. He could turn cartwheels, walk on his hands, and leap from ledge to ledge as nimbly as a mountain goat. In fact, being no longer a pirate or superstitious about whistling, he whistled up all the Chalmers ghosts that lived locally and mounted his friends on their backs, so that they fairly cantered down the road slopes and precipice of Neverpeak towards the dismal plain below. Even Humpty Dumpty jumping off his wall never had so much fun. Ravello was left far behind, made unthought of, and as slow-moving as a sloth by comparison with the League of Han. Nobody would have mistaken Peter for any dandified pirate captain now. The glossy ringlets Ravello had combed it to place where it soon tangled and matted, and stood up in wild confusion, lightning in the sunshine. Butterflies clambered round the bright colours of his tunic, and on their wings brought pollen that made him sneeze. Every time I sneeze, he bragged, astrologers in China spot a new planet coloured like a soap bubble. He went to blow his nose, and when Wendy snatched the handkerchief out of his hand, simply laughed and wiped his nose on his shirt sleeve instead. Then he made up a rude song about baboons, and they sang it at the top of their voices all the way down to the monkey puzzle trees. Not Wendy, though. She did not sing. She clutched the handkerchief between her two hands and began to weep inconsolably. The others stopped singing, "Bum-dee-bum, baboons," to stare at her. "It was all my fault," she wailed. "I might have killed Peter, and all for a silly sneeze." But Peter did not trouble with what if or might have been. He did not even mind about having no treasure to show for the quest to Neverpeak. The hunt for treasure is always more fun than the finding of it. After all, what could he have wished for, having what he had already? Friends and freedom and adventure and youth. Wendy, though, washed out the handkerchief in a little stream of icy water from the melting glacier, for fear any fog remained, then pinned it to a coat to dry, and because it had belonged once to a grown-up Wendy darling, she began to remember things. She remembered Kennigan Square and a little girl called Jane, remembered grocery bills and wash days, committee work and her husband, appointments at the dentist, and putting the bins out on Tuesdays. Just as dreams of Neverland had disturbed her peace of mind while she was in London, so dreams of homes began to hover around her now, as the fair butterflies hovered around Peter, butterflies and wasps. Climbing down the monkey puzzle trees was no more pleasant than before. The insects stung, the sap stuck their fingers and knees together, the spines pricked, and the twigs broke under their weight. Suddenly, to the sound of the banshee wailing and hooting and shrieking and yelling, the trees began to toss and flex and lash about, sending wasp nests and pine cones tumbling. The children clung for as long as they could. Then Peter sprang rashly out into empty air, and everyone lost their grip and dropped through the trees. The low branches showed no interest in catching them. Only the nets stretched wide by the roarers who had been lying in ambush for days. Chapter 22. Consequences. They had him at last. All those boys who had broken the rule and grown bigger. All those boys Peter had banished to Nowhereland, and who hated him for it with a deadly venom. The roarers bound their prisoners to the trunks of the monkey puzzle trees and spent the morning throwing pine cones at them for the fun of it. Meanwhile, they discussed what they would do with Peter Pan, how they would put him to death. "Hang him! No rope! Shoot him! No gun! Cut off his head then, or bury him alive! Him with a rock, or cut off his lights! Whatever you do, don't throw me into a bribe hatch," said Peter with a glimmer of a smile, when he had once told him the story of Brer Rabbit and how he tricked his way out of just trouble. But the roarers were not fooled. They soon knew the story of Brer Rabbit. They had heard it from Peter as they sat at his feet, happy lost boys all. "Make him walk the plank," suggested the twins, thinking the roarers might forget they were on dry land and not aboard ship, and would think that Peter had drowned. But the roarers were not fooled. "Scare him to death," said John, knowing that Peter was far too brave for that to work. But the roarers were not fooled. "Let us go, and I will be mother to you all," said Wendy. That was not a trick. It was an honest and straightforward offer made out of the goodness of her heart. But amazingly, the roarers did not want a mother. Full as they were with rage and disappointment, they believed mothers were almost as bad as Peter Pan. "Bog'll do it," said the oldest, and the rest agreed. "Now they're left out the bogging. Swamp the lot." All the words in the world would not soften this sentence of death. The roarers were going to drop Peter and his friend into quicksand. "We demand a trial," said Tootles, who had once been a High Court judge, remember. But she found herself now in a place without justice or fair play. The roarers had arrived themselves with branches ripped from the corkscrew dogwoods and dogwood trees. Now they drove the children towards their place of execution. Not far to go, on each side of the spongy track, swamps softly sucked and seethed, a carpet of crimson moss unrolled to welcome the unravelry and the doomed. The heights of never peak still loomed over them, cutting out the eastern sky. The roarers robbed the children of anything in their pockets, scrunched up the rainbow banner inside their grubby fists, and goaded everyone towards the red swamp. "Give me a sword, and I will fight you all single-handed," declared Peter. "Or are you two all cowardly?" But there was no appealing to the roarers' valour or pride. Any notion of nobility had died on the day of their banishment. Graceful boyhood had stirred them through no fault of their own, and left them burning, boldly and bony. Why should they give a hoot for honour or fair play? They dragged their prisoners in the back, forcing them towards the quagmire. "Who's first?" said the thinnest one, as they reached the brink. "I am," said Peter. "Always," and he thrust out his chest and tilted back his head and took one long stride out to the quicksand. After his illness, he was so light that his weight barely dented the surface. "You were supposed to grant me one last wish," he said, turning to face his assassins. "I asked you that you free my friends. They never did you any wrong." The roarers shrugged their bony shoulders around their joggy ears. "Any friend of yours," said the articulate one, without bothering to finish the sentence. "And we don't do wishes. Wishes is for fairies." The dreadified ground sucked thoughtfully as Peter's little bare feet decided it liked the taste, and closed over his toes and heels. "Consequences? Didn't I tell you?" came a voice from high overhead. And there, on the ledge above the monkey puzzle trees, the married shape of Ravello pointed at Peter a steel hook in place of a hand. "What did I tell you, cockadoodle? Every action has its consequences." The red mire swallowed Peter to his ankles. He spread his arms wide to keep his balance. Aurora pushed John onto the red carpet and elbowed Wendy after him. There was no fear in Pan's face, and his sad bewilderment that the roarers should feel so badly done by. "You all swore to keep the rule not to grow up. Why did you grow bigger if you didn't want to be banished?" "We was poisoned in it," said the roughest one. "Poisoned by a dirty, double-dealing twister of a chief." And he swung at Pan's head with his branch and missed. The look of injured reproach on Peter's face would have softened the hardest hearts if the roarers had had any hearts to soften. "Peter didn't betray you," said Wendy. "There is the man who betrayed you," and she pointed up at Hook. "He's the one who made you grow. If it hadn't been for Hook, you could have stayed young forever, just like Peter, and been able to fly and to come and go and visit your mothers and keep your promises and go questing after treasure 6 days in any week." She let out an involuntary yelp of disgust as a soupy redness reached the hem of her dress. Peter was already sunk to his waist, arms held high to keep his hands clean of mud. "Hook?" The roarers were confused by the name. "Captain Hook!" It reminded them of their old days in the Wendy house, listening to the stories of the villainous pirate eaten by a crocodile before they were even born. "It's not Hook. That's the circus man. Travelling man. Raveling man." Each knew the man on the mountainside, but not as James Hook, only as someone they had met on their travels. "Wendy is right. He is the one who poisoned Neverland," shouted Peter, chest deep down in the mire. "Tell them, Hook! Tell them how the bottle in their vest pocket leaked poison and killed the crocodile, poisoned the lagoon, late in time, and turned my lost boys into roarers." And Hook laughed and bowed one last time to Peter, no longer the servile bow of the valet, but the arrogant flourish of a victor nudging cheers. Each of the roarers could remember meeting the reveling man. A few could remember the feel of the greasy wool in their hands, and answering the question, "What do you want to be when you grow up, boy?" None had realised till now that they met the notorious Captain James Hook. Captain James Hook saw the roarers draw their branches, and like a turning tide started back towards them. They were roaring in that low crescendo of hate they gave them their name. "Hook! Hook! Hook! Hook!" They chanted, reaching the cliff, starting up the trees. Within minutes they would scramble up the ledge to where he stood. He raised the fingers of his hand to his mouth and blew. It was a startling quacking noise which made the roars falter in the climb. The quagmire faltered in its eager sucking. The ferns and heather of the plain stirred in swashing eddies and looked down. The roars recoiled in shock. The 12 lions and a family of bears, 3 tigers and a cotillo, ponies, a puma and a pluriel were coming at their master's call. Instinct taught the animals the safe routes through the bogs. Loyalty taught them their duty to save the great reveller from danger and to slaughter his foes. The roarers scattered, each man for himself, dropping their loot, throwing aside the rainbow banner. Like a firework exploding, they were invisible 5 seconds later. Some of the beasts gave chase, and others stood snuffing the air. Some prowled to and fro, looking for a way up to the master who had summoned them. The bears were sidetracked by the hives and the trees. Meanwhile, John had sunk in the mire up to his knees, Wendy to his waist, but the chief's chin was already beneath the sucking mud. The twins snatched up one of the branches dropped by the roarers and leaned out towards him as far as they dared. But then and there, in front of their very eyes, taking one gasp of air, he sank under. Nothing remained but 2 hale hands growing like fennel out the smooth red moss, and the branch did not reach. "Peter! Pass me that old branch there," said John, "and keep back from the edge." But John's branch could not reach Peter either. "Give me one too," said Wendy. "And hold still, John, or you'll sink faster." The twins threw a branch to John, who passed it to Wendy, and she reached out with it as far as her arms would let her. At the touch of rough wood, the pale hands closed in a fist. Then Wendy pulled and John pulled her, and the twins pulled John, and slowly, red feathers, coppery leaves, brown mud and bright blue eyes came to light, like spring after winter. Like the story of the giant turnip, they dragged Peter and each other to firm ground, and the band of friends saved themselves and each other from the terrible grip of the crimson quicksand. Panting and coughing, spitting and complaining about the mud in their knickers, they lay on solid ground, looking very like the branches that lay between them, laughing up at the sky. Such a lovely sky, with shreds and dabbles of rainbow in it. Then into their field of vision, into that sky, poked the leathery button nose of a bear, and into their mud-clogged ears came the throaty grumbling of lions discussing their next meal, and into their faces came the warm breath of 20 assorted beasts closing in for the kill.